Good evening, everybody. I'm Jim Alexander, Executive Director and founder of IPhO. We're very pleased tonight to continue our professional development programming series for fellows and focusing on how to get a job post-fellowship. Many of you may have attended our session in December in Las Vegas before the mid-year started, where we paired you with some fellowship alumni and talked about various strategies on getting a job post-fellowship. I'm pleased to welcome you tonight to the webinar on behalf of our IPhO National Fellows Council and our Professional Programming Committee. That's led by Vache and Bridget and backed by a very active set of committee members, including Anna, Shiv, Arya, Anastasia, Keely, Geddes, and Chris. Hopefully I didn't forget anybody there, but thanks to all of you for all of your ongoing efforts. Many of you are starting to look now, or probably already have started looking for positions outside of your host company, your fellowship organization. And so hopefully tonight's webinar is timely, whether you're actively looking or perhaps even just trying to gauge your value on the market. And some of you have encountered recruiters out there, so you're wondering some best practices on how to work with them. Got some questions, I hope, which we'll get to at the end through some Q&A. At any rate, if you're looking to demystify that, hopefully you've come to the right place tonight, because that's what we're hoping to do. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker here in a moment, but just one housekeeping item. Upper left part of your screen there, you can see Ask a Question. So hopefully we're going to cover a lot of what your interests are and your questions, but I know there's always more, and our speaker has graciously offered to stay at the end and do some Q&A. So ask your questions through that question box, and we'll get to them at the end. Anyway, tonight I'm very, very pleased to introduce to you Tom Caravela. Tom is the founder and managing partner of a very successful recruiting practice, the Carolan Group. He has 25 years of experience in our industry, including 15 in recruiting and career services. I had an opportunity to visit Tom recently in his office and meet his team, which is a high-performing group in terms of sourcing, recruiting, account managers to interact with clients. And they really specialize in medical affairs and in particular field medical at different levels. And Tom, he'll share more with you, but it was interesting to me to see the assignments he's working on for a number of companies who are adding maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 MSLs or field medical professionals to their organization. Anyway, I'm going to turn over to Tom here. Reminder about the Q&A. Please ask your questions there. And again, on behalf of IPhO National Fellows Council, welcome all of you as participants, but in particular, a warm welcome to Tom, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate your intro, and I'm actually really thrilled to be here, and I hope that my background, my experience, and my advice is going to be very useful for everyone on this call. I thought a lot about what information I can share with each of you, and just so you know, everything that we will discuss this evening and everything that I'm going to present really has come from folks like yourself, questions that we get all the time, situations that we run into. So it's all very, very real life and practical. And I'm really hoping that by the time we're finished with this webinar today, each of you will leave here with a better understanding of maybe your career goals, or how maybe you can transition your career in such a way, or definitely have a clear sense of direction as to some of the things that you could do to help yourself and take the next step as you search into industry. We're definitely going to help you find some advice and techniques to improve your CV and your resume We're going to talk about social media. We're going to talk about how important it is to utilize social media to help build your professional presence and your digital brand. And we're going to talk a lot about, how to work with a recruiter, how to find a recruiter, and what would be some of the things that you can do to optimize that partnership to help you get a job. So, where do we start? And I think that really the best thing for each of you to do is start to ask yourself some questions. What do you ultimately really want to do? Where do you see yourself? Do you want to be, field-based? Do you want to be in a field-based role? Do you want to work in-house at a pharmaceutical company? And if so, what would be your preference? Do you want to consider working for a large pharmaceutical company? Do you have your sights set on a small company? Obviously, if you have a therapeutic focus, that's going to play into some of the firms that you might look at, you might target. Are you interested in considering relocating and maybe taking a chance at, starting over in a different location? Are you looking to stay local? Is there a reason that you may want to consider a more shorter term position, maybe a contract position? So these are all questions that you're going to need to really kind of think about. A lot of people say to me, Tom, I'm not sure what I want to be when I grow up. I mean, I know I have, my pharmacy background, I have a degree, I have education, I have therapeutic experience, but I'm not 100% sure. So, what do I do? One of the things I recommend is, do your research. There's so many tools out there now. There's so much available. We recommend, go to Indeed.com. Simply Hired are two really good resources. I'm sure you're familiar with them. They're actually very popular. We're going to talk a lot about that a little bit, later on in the program. But it's Indeed is just the way it's spelled. It's INDEED. The other is Simply Hired, and essentially what they are is they're job site or websites that are specifically for job seekers. So you go into Indeed.com, you're going to type in a title, and you're going to type in a city. So maybe that title is medical communications or medical information or medical science liaison. And that'll, just as a start, be able to give you an idea and an understanding of what's out there, what positions are available, with what types of companies in what areas. You can do broader searches and go across the U.S., but that's a great place to start and just get some background info as just a foundation. So that's one place to start. And like I said, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. So now, the really important, one of the most important, if not the most important part of this entire equation, is your CV, your resume. We have to start there. Again, everybody needs to have an understanding first of, what they want to do, where they want to go. But if you don't have a foundation in a written format, it's going to be very difficult to attract any kind of attention. So most people on this webinar probably have something together. For those of you that don't, or for those of you that are not happy with what you have, I would ask your colleagues, see if you can get some examples. Try to find some templates. Use your network, within Jim's organization, and ask, colleagues, mentors. Eventually, when you develop relationships with recruiters, I would definitely ask their advice, share it with them. If you have a career coach, definitely start there, because this is something that's really going to need to be what you would consider perfect in your own mind. But you're also going to take that and make sure that, you know, your recruiters, your career coaches, some of the people that your mentors are going to agree that, yeah, you know what, you're putting out a really good message. This is a really good resume. It's very well done. So let me give you some tips. And I actually, on our website, and there's going to be a link to it later on in the program. If you go to carolangroup.com, on our homepage, there's an article about resume writing. And that's going to be helpful. But just to share some of that advice with you, you know, you definitely, when you take your CV and you take a look at it, be comfortable with the formatting first and foremost. You really want to make sure that you're comfortable with the way it looks, that it's clean, it's spell checked. You want the font to look right. You want it to be sharp looking. You don't want it to be, it's got to be professional. So that's really one of the first things you want to look at. The other thing too is as you start to make changes and put language into your CV, use action verbs. Here's a really good tip. Go to Google, type in action verbs for resumes. And you're going to come up with all these different hits that are going to show you lists of action verbs. And you'll even find it'll be broken down even per industry. You can find documents out there. So action verbs are developed, addressed, formulated, analyzed. Those are the types of words that you're going to want to incorporate into your CV. It's really, really important. I use this word digital branding. You want to create a digital brand for yourself. And what that means is that your CV is going to be emailed to someone. You're going to eventually apply for a position on a website within a company applicant tracking system. And that's all digital. And what happens is when recruiters, whether they're internal recruiters working for a company or external recruiters such as myself, when we're looking for people, we do that via keywords. We might look for PharmD and Chicago if we're looking for someone in that area that has a PharmD. You know, if we're looking for someone with a medical information background or a medical science liaison, we're going to use those terms. So it's important to brand yourself and use keywords. It's got to be keyword relevant. So if you want to get a job as a medical information associate, or if you want to get a job in medical communications or drug information within a pharmaceutical company, you need to incorporate those words somewhere. More importantly, you need to understand what are companies looking for when they're recruiting for someone in drug information or medical information or medical communications. Well, how do you know that? Well, go back to Indeed. Type into Indeed, medical information associate. Look at job descriptions. Look at what keywords are listed in those job descriptions. You know, the skills and the qualities that you have that match the words in those job descriptions, you're going to incorporate that into your CV. So this is just really good advice on how to provide the right digital brand for yourself for not only what you are and what you've been able to accomplish already and show on paper, but also what you want to do and how you want to be found and identified for your next position. Very, very important. So other real quick tips. People ask me, Tom, is it okay if I have multiple versions of my CV? It's absolutely okay if you have two different versions as long as you're being honest and you can support what you're saying. But if you're looking to consider a role in-house as, let's just say, in medical communications, or you might want to consider being a medical science liaison, and those two different resumes or CVs have really a different slant, well, that's fine. Just keep track of where you're sending it and for what purpose, and make sure you can support whatever it is that you are saying. But that's a question I get all the time. Do not lie. Definitely, I know people like to exaggerate or people like to build themselves up a little bit, and that's, listen, we do have to present ourselves in the best possible way. But we want to really just be careful as to, what we're saying and make sure that we can support it. Spell check, always spell check, proofread, make sure you are 100% on top of the way that CV looks and reads before you send it out to anyone, okay? Once you have everything documented where you feel 100% comfortable in the finished version, what you really need to do is take that information and make sure that it matches what you have in your LinkedIn profile. Now, I'm assuming everyone on this call has a profile on LinkedIn. If you don't have a profile on LinkedIn, I would suggest that you set one up as soon as possible and make sure that the information that you have on your CV is identical to what you have documented on LinkedIn and vice versa. Very, very important, and we're going to go into that in a little more discussion later on, but those are very important. Okay, so you know what you want to do. You have a direction. You have a really good CV that you're comfortable with. And now you are trying to engage in an active job search, and hopefully will find a recruitment firm that's going to assist you. So what do you do next? So again, we're going to go back to Indeed. We're going to go to Simply Hired, and we're going to go to LinkedIn as a couple of different places. Great information on Glassdoor. There's always not a bad idea to check out Monster to see what they may have advertised. But what I like most about Indeed and Simply Hired is that when you go to both of those sites and type in a keyword to do research on a specific area, let's say it's medical information associate in a certain area, you can create a job alert that will, in an automated fashion, will send you updates on a daily basis of what positions were posted in your area for what companies. So the research that you're doing is actually coming to you every day. And you can do more than one job alert. You can actually set them up for different titles in different areas, and you can do that across Indeed. You can do it across Simply Hired. I think you can even do it for Monster too. From an industry perspective, I like to just do Indeed and Simply Hired. I think they're the best. And this is going to give you a good indication of what's going on in the market. I really recommend a spreadsheet or a journal or something that you can document what you're most interested in. So when you get those email alerts and you get excited about a job opportunity that is available in your area, put it on a spreadsheet and keep track of it and put the information on there. Make sure that if you send your resume or your CV and apply to that position online, document that. Be aware of who you applied to, what position, what the title was, who was the person that you may have applied to if there isn't contact person's name. And make sure you indicate which CV you sent them if you have more than one version. Very, very important. Now, here's where the whole Find a Recruiter comes into play. When you utilize these tools and when you do your research, not only are you going to see job descriptions and postings from companies, you're also going to see them from recruitment firms. And that's going to give you an indication of who specializes, what recruitment firms specialize in the specific areas that you have interest in. Now, for those postings and positions, I would try to find a phone number. I would call and ask for to speak with a recruiter within that organization for that specific job description, because you want to develop a relationship. Can you apply to it and send your CV in through that posting? Absolutely. But I would be proactive. I would also document that so that you have an understanding, again, of who you're reaching out to. It's just good advice. So we accomplish a couple of things here. Number one, we're going to give a really good gauge as to what's going on in the marketplace. Number two, we're going to have a spreadsheet, and we're going to have an understanding of what companies are hiring where for what positions. And number three, we're going to have an understanding of what recruitment firms we want to try to work with that specialize in the areas that that we're looking to get into. Now, on the flip side, we talk about LinkedIn. LinkedIn ties in with this, and let me tell you exactly how. So what I want to challenge everyone on this call to do is to make sure that, number one, you have a LinkedIn profile. Number two, your LinkedIn profile completely mirrors and matches your CV. Number three, every single day, I want to challenge you to add connections, as many connections, relevant connections, to your professional network on LinkedIn as you can. Go to colleagues, people that you went to school with, people you went to grammar school with, people that you went to high school with, people that you went to college with, people that you played sports with, people that you did your fellowships with. Anyone and everyone from a professional or personal standpoint, the more the better. I highly recommend it. Because here's what's going to happen. Eventually, when you go back to that list, that spreadsheet of research, and you say there's 5 positions or 2 positions or however many positions that you really, really, truly have interest in pursuing, what I recommend doing is now go into LinkedIn and type in the name of that company into the LinkedIn search bar. And what's going to happen is now, once you click that button, you're going to be able to see how many people you are connected to in that company. So people always say, well, it's not what you know, it's who you know. How do I get a foot in the door? How do I get myself in front of the right people? You would be very, very surprised. The more connections you have on LinkedIn, the bigger your network is, the greater the chance you might have a first, a second, or a third connection within a company that may have a position that's a good fit for you. And then all you do from that standpoint is you send that person an in-mail, or you send them a message within LinkedIn. You can purchase in-mails if you can't connect to that, if you don't have access to sending that person a message. And you just send them a note. I noticed this job posting for your company. I see we're connected. Very interested. I have the right skills. Would you consider referring me for this position? And depending on the relationship you have with that person, you're going to tailor that message in a different way. So you're taking matters into your own hands. You're going out, you're doing the research. You're identifying what it is that you ultimately want to do at what organization, and you're trying to see what kind of connections you have so that you can try to get a foot in the door. So this slide is really important. I'm hoping everybody took notes. I'm challenging you on starting this process and taking matters into your own hands. This is going to be very important. Now, we're going to talk now about understanding recruiters and how to work with recruiters, and let's just take a step away from that last slide talks about what you can do for yourself to engage in a job search. Now, what can a recruiter do for you? So before we get into the discussion on how to work with a recruiter, let's first gain an understanding of what different types of recruiters there are. And I'll be very quick. I mean, essentially, there are internal recruiters that work within a company, and then there are external recruiters. So that would be recruitment firms, headhunters, and there's different types. There's contingency recruiters that they will work for a company, partner with the company to try to fill a position, but they're only getting paid if their candidate gets the job. And then you have retained recruiters that they're being retained just to fill that job. No matter what, it's their job to fill, and they're getting paid no matter what. What's the difference between the two? I think both are going to work really hard on your behalf. I would not suggest that you need to only look for retained recruiters versus contingency recruiters. I think you should follow the process of identifying what positions you want to pursue, like we discussed about LinkedIn and Simply Hired, and then once you find recruiters that specialize in your area, reach out to those folks and see if they can help you get into some of these opportunities. So let's assume that you did that, okay, and you get a recruitment firm on the phone. You have one or two recruiters that you're working with. How do you work with these guys? Okay, what are the expectations? So here's what I would suggest, okay. Next slide, Jim. First thing, understand what that recruiter is going to want from you. This is important because you want to be able to be prepared so that when you get these folks on the phone, you're going to have everything that they're going to need and want from you to be able to partner properly. So first thing is, you want to make sure that you have your CV ready, okay, because you're going to provide that for them and you're going to ask for their advice and their suggestions. And this is going to be important. It's definitely a good practice to make sure that with each recruiter that you work with, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, I don't recommend contacting more than 2 or 3 recruiters, to be honest with you. But you definitely want to get their buy-in on what exactly they think of your CV, what suggestions and advice they may be able to give you, and I would definitely take it. So the other thing that that you can expect is, you took matters into your own hands. You started a job search. You're doing things on your own. Well, what are they going to do? Okay, what kind of job search assistance are they going to give you? What kind of advice, guidance? Do they know the market? What are they going to be able to tell you about the market? So have a list of questions ready for them. I wouldn't bombard them. I wouldn't hammer them. I would just have a list of questions to help you understand what you can do to position yourself properly in the market for what you're looking to do. Now, I know a lot of job seekers will call a recruiting firm with an expectation that they're just going to have all these job openings ready to go. Well, I wish that were the case, and I wish that every time someone called me, I had the perfect positions for them or several positions for them. Timing is everything. I can tell you that timing is the greatest factor and indicator in this entire business. I think they may potentially have positions. They certainly may have a position to discuss because you just saw something posted, potentially. So that's a start, but what you're really looking for is to get on common ground with them so that they will agree to represent you for potential opportunities, for future opportunities. So this is really kind of a foundation of what you can expect from them, and then they're going to have expectations for you. Okay, so again, they're going to want a well-written CV. We already checked that box because we talked about that. They're going to want to know, what are your goals? What are you looking to do? We talked about that earlier. I would be very clear and define the types of positions where, are you open to relocation? Do you want to stay local? All the stuff we talked about in that first slide, I would be prepared to present to them in a very honest and transparent fashion. I think it's really, really important to be 100% transparent with your recruiter. Otherwise, they're not going to be in a position where they can help you. And, getting back to the spreadsheet, keeping track of your research, keeping track of where you apply to positions. I would discuss that with my recruitment partners. I would make sure that they're aware of what you've already done, because the one thing that's really going to make someone look bad is if you apply to the same positions over and over, or other sources continue to send your CV in for the same position. So you want to be on the same page as much as you possibly can and create that level of trust. The other thing and the last thing, and this is really important, when you're working with a recruitment partner, you want to be as responsive as you can. So when they reach out to you, you want to put forth the right effort and the right responsiveness and just be a cohesive unit. So, things will go efficiently and go smoothly. There's really nothing worse for us recruiters when, we have what we think is an interested candidate that all of a sudden disappears or doesn't get back to you or doesn't respond. I just think it's bad form. So let's assume for a second that everything goes really well. Okay, so you follow all these steps and you get offered a job. Okay, so what are some of the important things that you're going to need to know when you're offered a job? Okay, so this is always the biggest question that people, well, not the biggest question, but one of the questions that we get on a regular basis. People always ask me, so Tom, I'm in an interview or I'm talking to my internal recruiter or I'm talking to my recruitment firm, and they ask me, what are you currently making? Well, it's very simple. There's only one way to answer that question. You tell them very honestly and very accurately exactly what you're making. I think a lot of people try in certain situations to either not answer this or to be vague about it or to inflate it or whatever. The best practice is to just be completely honest. Know your numbers. If you have a base salary and a bonus and incentives or whatever it might be, make sure you know what those numbers are. If not, if it's just, I work hourly and here's my hourly and here's how many hours I worked last year and here's what I made, you should be able to have that information, find that information, provide that information to the people that ask. The second question is, so what are you hoping to make? What are you expecting to make in your next role? Well, a lot of people aren't comfortable answering that because they feel like if they give a number, well, then they're painting themselves into the corner. And you know what? I can understand that. So it's okay. And just so you know, it is okay to say I am seeking a fair and competitive package, or you can say I'm seeking a competitive increase. Sometimes people say, I'm really eager and interested in this opportunity. I don't want to totally make it about money, but to be honest, I'm really looking for a competitive increase for my next role. And that's a very fair way to go about explaining to your either internal recruiter or your recruitment partner where you stand. I will say this. When you're working with a recruitment firm, when I'm working with my candidates, I really do want an idea on numbers, or at least a range. And I want to be able to say, okay, you're making X amount of dollars now, and what you'd like to see in your next role is X plus, give or take this range, just to be able to be on the same side and on the same page with your recruitment firm, because, they're the ones that are going to be helping negotiate on your behalf, so they're going to need to understand that. So I think this is an important discussion. I think this is the foundation of how the offer is going to come in, and it's also where you want to be able to put your best foot forward if your recruitment firm is going to be negotiating on your behalf. So you want to get on the same page with them. Be honest. Be as specific as you can, but just, make sure that you guys are all on the same page. So the next question is, okay, so how do companies formulate the job offer? How do they do it? So if you are interviewing for a position, you're making $100,000 a year now, and you're interviewing for a position, what can you expect? How do they come up with an offer? Do they, can I negotiate? How do I negotiate? So how does this all work? Well, there's really the formula probably 90% of the time within organizations is they look at three things. They look at your current compensation, which is really the main reason that they ask you what you're currently making. And they're going to want to know exactly what that is, like we've discussed. They're going to want to know your desired compensation, okay? And they're going to ask you, where do you feel like you need to be? Where do you expect this offer to come in? And again, you may say, I want a competitive increase. You may not give them a number. And then the other thing that they're going to look at is they're going to look at the internal peer group, what the company is actually paying people currently in that exact same role. So that's what we call, the fancy term is called internal equity, okay? So they're going to look at what they're paying people now. They're going to look at what your current compensation is, and they're going to look at where you want to be. And typically those three things come together for them to formulate an offer. Now, in all fairness, to be realistic, there are parameters. Sometimes companies have formulas that say, well, we can only pay up to a certain percentage above what you're currently making. So let's just say, for argument's sake, you make $100,000 a year now. They may have a cap at 18% or 15%. So if you're looking for a big increase because you're ready for a raise or a promotion, or you haven't gotten one in a while, and you're below some kind of standard, and you think that you're going to go from 100 to 125 or 130, they may have a cap. They may say the most we can give you is 118,000 because we have an 18,000 or an 18% factor that we can't go past. It's not totally uncommon, but some companies do work that way. Most times what you can expect is that this formula, current compensation, desired compensation, and internal equity, is really what is going to determine the final offer. So now what? So you get an offer, and the offer is presented to you by either your recruitment firm, or it's presented to you by an internal recruiter, okay? What I would say is, if you can have your recruitment firm negotiate on your behalf, I would definitely suggest trying to do that. We have a lot of experience. We've been doing this, a lot of us, and depending on who you're working with, I'm assuming that you're going to work with somebody that's been doing it long enough that you can trust. So if that element of trust is there, rely on them. They probably know their client a lot better than you. They've probably done it a lot more, and they're, I'm sure, in a position where they can probably get you the best offer. So that's number one. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes the company takes the bat out of our hands and they say, we just want to talk directly to the candidate, so we're going to work with them on this, and you follow along. But here's the thing, and this is very, very important. When someone presents you with an offer, whether it's an internal recruiter or it's a recruitment firm, the best and most important thing that you could do is be gracious. Don't balk. So if someone makes you an offer, whether it's way more than you expected or when it's a little bit less than you expected, regardless of the scenario, be gracious. The first thing that you should say is, I want to thank you for presenting me with this offer. I want to let you know that I really appreciate the offer. Be gracious. I think that that's got to be the foundation of the discussion. If it turns out that you do feel like it's something that you want to negotiate a little bit further, it's okay to say, after you're gracious, it's okay to say, I was really hoping and expecting that that number would be higher, that the base salary would be coming a little bit higher. I was hoping and expecting that there may be some room, a little more room, on the base salary. Is there any way that we can take a look into that? So again, even if you're trying to negotiate, even if you want to push back a little bit, as long as you're doing it in a very tactful fashion, you never, ever want to give the impression that it's all about money. Now, in all fairness, I kind of have an expression in this business. It's always about the money. When push comes to shove, no one wants to make less money, okay? But you don't want to give anyone the impression that the only reason you're having the conversation is for money. You want to let them know that you appreciate their time, you appreciate the offer, you appreciate the opportunity and the chance to work there. But by the same token, you want to be able to say things like, I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing for myself and for my family and for my future. These are some of the things that you want to try to very tactfully incorporate into the discussion. Let's just say everything comes together, okay? Expectation time-wise, okay? So you get to a point where the company says, okay, we can go to this, okay? We can give you X amount of dollars. This is our best and final offer. What my expectation would be is, a couple of days maximum. Sometimes offer letters are going to say we need a response in 7 days or 4 days or whatever. And sometimes it's open-ended. All industries work differently. All companies work differently. My rule of thumb, and the way I like to work things, and I tell my candidates this, if you're interviewing for a position and you're doing so over the course of several weeks, you've had several discussions, you've probably flown out somewhere, or you've taken the time to go through the interview process, when you're presented with an offer, you shouldn't need more than 48 hours to make a decision. Talk to your spouse, get to the bottom line, figure out what the situation is, and make a timely decision. Either way, whether you're saying yes or you're saying no, I really think that it's very important to be upfront, to be honest, know your situation, and know that the way you start your new position is with this part of the process. So you want to be tactful in how you approach it, okay? So, that's a lot of the real nuts and bolts of what I wanted to discuss and go over, but I did want to, highlight that there are a lot of resources available, and I really suggest that in addition to utilizing LinkedIn, and when I say social media, to me, I don't think Facebook has really gotten to the point where it's been utilized as much as it probably will in the future as it will relate to job searches, at least not in our industry just yet. So I would say really be active on LinkedIn. Join, industry, the groups that are within LinkedIn, some of the therapeutic groups, industry groups. You guys are already in a great association and you have a great network there. But these are some of the things that I would definitely incorporate into your week. I'm not going to say every day, but it's something you want to incorporate into your weekly process. Would it make sense to get an additional certification? Yeah, absolutely. You can become a board-certified medical affairs specialist. That's listed on the screen. It's a program that just came out. You can do some research on it. There's a Medical Affairs Society or MSL Society now that has programs that you can do online. And then there's career coaching services. And so, I think there's a lot of resources. I think it's important to stay active. But when it comes to the job search itself, I really think the combination of Indeed and Simply Hired and LinkedIn, like we talked about, I think that's going to be your best bet for success. So definitely want to open the floor to some questions. I know I talked a lot. I went pretty quick. So I'm going to open up the floor, whatever I can answer to help you guys out.
And again, I'll just thanks, Tom, and I'll just point everybody towards that ask a question button. I got to do a couple of little administrative things here to get over to that. But meanwhile, I looked at the chat there. It looks like Masuma is asking a question we can answer in transition here. She's asking, Tom, about a CV versus a resume. It's a common question. It's kind of like in the medical area, sometimes they want to see everything you've done, including every publication. And sometimes I'm generalizing, but like the commercial area might be one-page resume. They'll never see anything past the first few sentences, so you got to get, bottom line up front. So what's your advice on providing a CV, a curriculum vitae that's complete versus a shorter resume?
Well, I know that, a lot of people have both because they don't want to be in a situation where someone's asking for a CV but they only have a resume and vice versa. I think it's really important in industry to have details. So the one thing that I do not like about a CV is that a lot of time traditional CVs they don't list details of responsibilities as much as it details where you've been, what you've done, what you've been responsible for, your publications and your schooling and your education and your posters and, all that other stuff. So if, regardless of whether or not you have a traditional CV or a resume, when you're applying for an industry position, it's very, very important that you offer and provide details to your, prospective employer. Okay. When I mean details, it needs to have in chronological order what you have done throughout your experience, going back to your education till now, as far as functional responsibilities, achievements, and incorporate all the other stuff too. But you have to have some details.
Tom, you were mentioning about the different levels of salary, and we may have talked about this, you and I, that the fellows are making in the 40s, but often this first position that they're going to get is 100, 110, 120, something like this. How do you explain that to a recruiter? And you said be honest. I think that's a lot of it, but how do you explain that to a recruiter who may not be used to working with the fellow? It's like, oh, you're making 40 something and you want to make 120? What would you say if you were hearing that as a recruiter?
Well, so we deal with that all the time, and so here's the way to go about that. So if you're making 40 or 50 or 60 or whatever the situation is, and you're transitioning into industry, the one question you want to ask your recruiter, or you want to ask, whether it's internal or external recruiter, is what is the position paying? What's the position typically pay? And get a range. Now, realistically, you wouldn't expect to get the high side of the range because you're not going to go from 40 to 150. But you want to be able to have them tell you what you can expect, what your upside is. And it's a fair question. So if you're asking a recruiter, maybe the better way to ask it is, what would someone with my background expect for, to break into this industry for a competitive salary at this position? I always like to use the word competitive because it indicates to them that, hey, you know what? I want a good job. And if I'm going to get that job, I want it to be competitive. And you want to use that term to let them know that you don't want to get a job and then look for something else. You want to be happy and be successful in the role that you're in.
And, some of the applicator, the job boards, some of the application processes invite you or have room for you to submit a cover letter. So what are your thoughts around a cover letter? What should be in it? What's your advice around a cover letter?
I encourage the use of cover letters provided that they're brief and you really are succinct in telling the person the highlights that you really want them to know as it relates to why they should hire you for that position. So you have to have an understanding of what position you're applying to. You have to have an idea of what they want. You can look at the job description. You have to give them very, very clearly and concisely a reason to want to speak with you and a reason why they're going to be convinced that you're someone that can compete for the job. The one thing that I really, really, want to caution, each of you is you really have to make sure that these cover letters are brief, because people don't want it. They may open it. I've had cover letters that I've opened up and I just close them because they're just too long and too detailed. No one's going to read it. So I would make it brief, I would make it concise, and I would give them very good reasons to want to talk to you.
And what about timing? Often the fellows, some of the programs, whatever, it may go all the way to June 30. Some of the fellows can complete in the April or May time frame. We're kind of working back from that and assuming that they want to, finish and get a certificate of completion. What do you look at as a recruiter as a normal time frame? I mean, I do some recruiting too, so I know most of the time the clients want the position filled yesterday, because otherwise work's not getting done or somebody's filling in for it. But just on average, when would you expect somebody to reach out to a recruiter, knowing what their goal is of getting sitting in that seat starting day one on the job?
So you mean in anticipation of completing their program?
Yeah, well, when do they want to engage a recruiter, in anticipation of just say they want a start date on June 1st, how much in advance of June 1st should they engage a recruiter, knowing that it takes some time to get from point A to B to C to be sitting in that seat on day one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really think that, it's funny, you want to say sooner than later, but if you start too soon and something develops, you're going to have to be very transparent in explaining to both your internal recruiter or the external recruiter and both the internal recruiter eventually that your start date has to be after a certain day. So what I would suggest, if for argument's sake, if you're let's say it's June 1st, I would say you really want to start 4 or 5 months ahead of time. 5 months is definitely, even 6 months is not too soon. And the reason I say that is because, it's going to take you time to get some momentum. It's going to take you time to develop relationships and get a feel for what's out there, start getting some interviews. And, the only downside to starting that early is if something really truly does develop quickly enough, an employer is going to probably want, they're probably going to want you to start within a few weeks. You can always, and again, just be very transparent to say, the soonest I can start is this, right from the beginning. So at least it's built into the conversation.
Okay, we're going to do 2 more questions, Tom. Here's one about, comparing job boards. So you talked about Indeed, places like Indeed or Simply Hired. What's your feeling about those versus the individual boards that the companies, the employers, put up themselves? Are they up to date? Is there like a daily scrape that goes out to keep Indeed and Simply Hired kind of synced up with these, or should go to both? What do we do?
Well, that's actually a really good question, and there is a daily scrape. So the jobs that you see on Indeed and Simply Hired are there's spider bots that go out each day and they scrape those jobs from company websites. Here's the problem. The problem is a lot of times employers will post a job after the fact, several weeks or several months later, when the position's already filled, because there's sometimes expirations on jobs. So it might appear to be a new job, but in reality it might be something that was already posted. And that's why it's important to keep track of this stuff, because you'll get to see a pattern. You'll get to see what's new versus what's reposted. And the reason it gets reposted by an employer is because, they'll put it out. They probably didn't fill it quickly enough. Maybe the job expired in some fashion, and they need to have it, documented in their applicant tracking system so that the person that just got the job can be applied to it, which is really frustrating because it's not a real job. So there is a little trickery involved. There are some things out there that aren't necessarily active or live or real, and you just have to be careful and be diligent in your research to try to define, what's new, what's viable and what's not viable. It's frustrating.
Okay, last question, and we'll have just a few closing comments. So what about in terms of, how do we assess recruiters? There's a lot of them out there. Some of them are great. You have a great operation. You've been up and running for 15 years, very successful. Others, not great. Or maybe they're just getting into it. I don't know. But anyway, what are some tips on trying to assess recruiters? What tips do you have for the fellows?
That's another great question. And, I think that there's a couple things. Number one, you always want to ask your peers. Ask around. So when you see firms out there, and like I said, if you're on Indeed, you're simply hired, and you see some of these firms out there, and you're making a list of them, I would ask around. I would double check and see, hey, have you ever heard of this firm? Have you ever heard of this person? And see what some of your colleagues might say. The other thing too is, do your own little self-evaluation of, and come up with your own ideas based upon what's their website look like. How up to date is their website with information? Does it look like it was one person that created the site, on their own over the weekend, or is it fairly elaborate? How many locations does the office have? Are they just one little local firm? Do research on LinkedIn. Go to LinkedIn, look up that company, see how many employees work at that company and at that firm. See what positions they're posting and what niche it's in. Are they all over the place? The one thing I would highly recommend is if you see a firm that does everything and they don't specialize in anything, I would have to think that they're probably more general and they might not necessarily, be what you want, because I always believe that there's got to be somebody that specializes in what you want, and I would recommend you go to that person, those types of people.
All right, terrific. Well, we did record tonight's webinar with Tom's permission. Tom, you can take a look at that, and with your okay, we'll post that on our website. So if you missed something or perhaps missed the beginning, you can go back. If you like what you heard, fellows, join IPhO and the National Fellows Council. I want to thank our professional programming committee again, and of course, a special shout out to Tom. Tom, that was great. I learned a lot, I know, and I'm about 14 years behind you in this business, so I was taking careful notes too. So a big shout out to Tom. Thanks for sharing your time and your experience and advice. Really, really appreciate it. Hey, to all of you fellows out there, good luck with the job hunt. Let IPhO know how we can help you, including our job board, our coaching service. Tom put a slide out there with some links to some different things that, some support services that we both have. And anyway, again, thanks to Tom and everybody for joining, and I just wish everybody a good night. Thanks so much.